Alright, so today's video is all about cell theory. So there are 3 vocabulary words for you to write down your definitions today. The first one is cell, the second is unicellular, and the third is multicellular. Okay, so cell theory has 3 parts. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail for these. So number 1, all living things are made of cells. So if something is alive, it has cells. If something does not have cells, that means it is not alive. So examples of living things with cells are people, trees, mushrooms, worms, bacteria, algae, which is that green stuff like pond scum on top of a lake. Anything that's alive, your dog, your sister, a bush, like anything that's living is made of cells. Also, anything that used to be alive can still have cells. So like one of our examples in class was hamburger. Well, hamburger comes from a cow, and a cow is something that's alive. So hamburger will have cells in it because it was part of something that used to be alive. Or like a piece of fruit. Fruit grows on trees for the most part, or bushes. And since it was a part of something that used to be alive, the tree or the bush, then fruit will also have cells. So anything that was alive or still is alive has cells. So number 2, the cell is the basic unit of life. So basically, if you have at least one cell, whatever you're looking at is alive, as long as it has at least one cell. Anything smaller than one cell, so the little parts, they're called the organelles inside the cell. So like the part that controls the cell, the part that takes the waste away, the part inside the cell that creates energy. All those little parts inside the cell are not alive because they are smaller than a cell. Anything smaller than one cell is not alive. So some scholars asked me about atoms. And if you know, an atom is like on the periodic table, and we'll talk about those next unit. But basically an atom is the smallest particle, like it's the smallest part of anything. And so cells are made up of atoms too. So atoms are much smaller than cells, so therefore atoms are not alive. You cannot have anything smaller than a cell and call it alive. Okay? And then number 3, all cells come from other cells. So when we watched in the video, one guy thought that cells just kind of popped up out of nowhere, and another guy thought that cells come from other cells, and he was correct. So basically, your cells don't just come out of nowhere. Like a baby human, like a little baby, doesn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? It's grown, and the cells kind of come together and create the eyes and the legs and all that kind of stuff. So if you have a younger sibling, they didn't just come out of nowhere. They were grown from other cells, okay? So all cells come from other cells. Okay, so our first vocabulary word today is cell. And that's the picture here is a very, very, very basic picture. Normally the cells have all kinds of things floating around in it, but this is basically just showing you one cell. It's the smallest unit of an organism and is enclosed by a membrane and performs life functions. So on the picture, the green inside is the interior of the inside of the cell, and the black circle around it, that would be the membrane. So the membrane is kind of like a fence, like it keeps everything of the cell inside, so none of it escapes and like just floats away. Okay, so the membrane keeps everything inside of the cell. So here's kind of a magnified or very, very, very zoomed in picture or photo, or excuse me, picture of cells. And so this is what some of them might look like. These are probably animal cells because of the way they're shaped. If you remember from 5th grade, animal cells are kind of blobby looking, and plant cells kind of look like boxes because they have a cell wall. So this is just kind of like what some cells might look like. So our next word is unicellular organism, and it has one cell. So if you think of unicellular, uni means one. Okay, if you ride a unicycle, that's a cycle that only has one wheel. If you have a unicorn, that's a horse with one horn. Okay, so uni means one. So a unicellular organism is an organism made up of a cell. So these are like bacteria, or some, they're called protists, and we'll talk about that in a future lesson, where they're not bacteria, they're a little bit more advanced, but they're still only made of one cell. Okay, so anything smaller than a cell member is not alive. So these organisms have to have at least one full cell. Okay, so this is a picture of what some unicellular organisms might look like. So unicellular organisms can never be seen just with your eyes. You will always have to use a microscope because they are way, 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 way too small to be seen without like help. Okay, so they're very, 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 very tiny. All right, so our next word is multicellular, which is basically the exact opposite of unicellular. So this year in science, we have all kinds of words where you learn one definition, and the second definition is just the opposite. Okay, so this is an organism made up of more than one cell and often made up of different types of cells. So in our brain pop, we kind of saw about how like different cells maybe have different jobs. So like in our body, we have nerve cells and bone cells and muscle cells and blood cells, all kinds of different cells that have certain jobs. So sometimes multicellular organisms will have different types of cells that serve different functions. So we are multicellular organisms, trees, worms, grass, mushrooms, basically any organism that you can see with your eyes without needing a microscope is multicellular, because that means it's large enough for you to see, so it's got many, many, many cells inside. And so for an example, this chimpanzee who was very excited about something is a multicellular organism. Or is that an orangutan? I think that's an orangutan. Sorry, it's an orangutan. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the notes part, and the first part is called just Cells, the Inside Story. Alright, so here we have some of our notes. The smallest unit of life is the cell. So remember, you can't have anything smaller than a cell and still call it alive. And cells are the structural and functional units of all living things. So everything that's alive is made up of cells. It provides them structure, so it gives them a shape, and it also does different functions. So the cells, like I said, can be like bone cells or blood cells or lung cells or whatever type of cells you need. So it gives you a shape and they do jobs. Okay, and then our next slide is humans are multicellular and most bacteria is unicellular. So we have multiple cells because you can see us without a microscope, and bacteria, remember, are so small that you have to have a microscope in order to see them.